This is a page of begats, generations. The boringest stuff in the entire Torah. But like everything else, there's gold in them Bar Hills. There's gold here. Now, each generation gets 3 verses. Take a look at verse 6. Each generation gets the third. The first verse tells you how old this person was when he begot his designated successor. Shais lived 105 years, begot Enosh. Second verse tells you how long he lived after that, and that he had sons and daughters. Shais lived 807 years, begetting Enosh, begot sons and daughters. The third verse does a little math, totals it up, and says he died. All the days of Shais were 912 years, and he died. And so it is, generation after generation. We talked about the exception at the bottom of the page. I'm not interested in that now. I'm interested in the template. Now, if you look on page 51, this is the begats after the flood. Look at page, start with verse 12 at the top of the page. Arpachshad lived 35 years when he begot Shelah. That's just like the first verse in the previous list. Arpachshad lived 403 years after begetting Shelah. He begot sons and daughters. That's just like the second verse in the previous list, but the third verse is left off. The total of his days, and he died, is left off. So, there are various remarks that different commentaries make about how to understand this. The Pri Tzaddik, great Hasidic commentator, says the difference is because the generations before the flood were almost entirely wiped out. There left only eight people. So these people lived and had sons and daughters, and it came to a close. But here in 51, we're talking about after the flood, and after the flood doesn't come to a close. It's a continuing human population. That's why the third verse, summing it up with the words, and he died, is left off. Are we getting so far? Okay. Now, you all know that Noach, his 3 sons and their wives were the ones who survived the flood. So, if you were to guess, speculate, hypothesize, opine, what kind of treatment will Noach himself get? How will the text record his lifetime? With the pattern of the first list or the pattern of the second list? What would you guess? Second list. I mean, after all, he did live after the flood another 300 years, 350 years. But look at page 45. Verse 28, in the middle of the page. Noach lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noach were 950 years, and he died. Now, why would it be that Noach will get a pre-flood summation? He lived 350 years after the flood.
Perhaps it's not about the date when he died, but when he was born. He was born before the flood, as were everyone in the generations before.
Okay, so now, first of all, as he's pointing out, he's a transition figure. He's born before and dies afterwards. Like, how should you explain him? But if you take the explanation that I just gave you, the Pri Tzaddik's explanation, what does it sound like? And I have to think on 2 levels. The immediate answer is, he lived after the flood, so he should get a post-flood formula? Let's think. The whole world, after the flood, is composed of descendants of who? Okay, of Noach, yes, that's true. The 3 sons of Noach are the progenitors of everyone later. Everyone later. They were born before the flood. So what happened? He lived 350 years after the flood, and yet had no children. He had no children in those 350 years. Only the three that he had before became the source of the whole population afterwards. So maybe it sounds like, did he really survive? If the formula on page 51 is because these people created generations that were going to last, Noah after the flood didn't do that. He didn't do that. It was all prior to the flood. Then you know, we learned this, well, some of you know, we learned this a long time ago, that after the flood, became a drunk. It looks like, from the text, he didn't completely make it through. Something was left behind. He didn't come through as a functioning, creative, contributing person. And maybe that's what's indicated by giving him a pre-flood formulation, because indeed he's a pre-flood figure. He's in the end a pre-flood figure. Chapter 19. In the third month of the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, on this day they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. They journeyed from Rephidim and arrived at the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness, and Israel camped there opposite the mountain. Now, the rabbinic comment is this. The last 8 words that I read. And Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. The rabbinic comment is, Ki ish echad b'lev echad, like one person with one heart. This is taken as an expression of unity. Exquisite unity. Where are they getting that from? Where are they getting that from? The rabbis don't fool around, and they don't just offer thoughts because they're pleasant or poetic or good morals for people to live by. Where are they getting it from? Well, here are two suggestions. Number one, you might have thought because it mentions Israel, which is the name of the nation, and Israel is singular. That's wrong. I will show you in the next few minutes that that's definitely wrong. But the rabbis are commenting on the following two facts. Go back to the beginning of 19. In the third month of the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, on this day, they arrived. Now in Hebrew, there's a difference between a singular verb and a plural verb. In English, you say they arrived or he arrived. Say it the same way, but you don't do it in Hebrew. The verb here is a plural verb. They arrived, plural. 2, they journeyed, plural. And arrived, plural. And encamped, plural. And Israel encamped, singular. So you have 4 plural verbs followed by a singular verb. That's not an accident. And not only that, this is the second point, you have the verb to encamp twice, one right after the other. So if the text has 4 plural verbs and a singular, and the fourth of the plural and the singular are the same verb, and it's repeated as singular, the text is waving a flag and saying, hey, it was really singular. And that expresses the idea that there was an exquisite unity here. Are we together so far? Okay. Now, the well-read critic will say, but Rabbi, if that's true, take a look on page 369. Look at verse 9 at the bottom of the page. Egypt pursued. And there the verb is plural. Even though the subject is the name of a nation, the verb is plural. So don't tell me the reason why it's singular on 401 is because the name Israel is there. The name of a nation can take a singular verb or a plural verb. Each of them is appropriate. Egypt pursued, plural. And overtook, plural. All the horses, by P.B. Now, next page. Pharaoh approached, children of Israel raised their eyes. Behold, Egypt was journeying, singular. So you have two plural verbs and then a singular verb. Should we say the same thing for Egypt, Rabbi? That Egypt was also unified? After all, you said it for the Jewish people were unified. And here you have two plurals and a singular. And the answer is, of course, you have to say it. You can't play fast and loose with the text. You can't destroy the text in order to fit your preconceptions or your prejudices or your commitments. If it's plural, plural, singular, you have to say that it's unified. And indeed, that's what the rabbinic tradition comments. With one heart, like one man. Now, if we were doing this for points and for a grade, I would ask you, what's the difference between the way I formulated it for the Jews and formulated it now? Were you paying attention? I expressed the unity in both cases, but the unity is not expressed in exactly the same way.
It's passive for the Egyptians and active for Israel.
I don't hear where that connects. The verbs are active verbs, and the way I described it was, I think, neither passive nor active. I said, with respect to the Jewish people, like one person with one heart. With respect to the Egyptians, I said, with one heart, like one person. The order is reversed. The order is reversed. What's the difference? The difference is that people who have differing commitments, differing values, especially different politics, can agree on a common project, like the French parties stopped the extreme right from winning a single province, a single area, by the socialists in some places dropping out, so the center would be able to win. You can cooperate on a single action when it happens to suit your different purposes. Because you have one heart with respect to this particular project, you behave as if you're one person. That's Egypt. That's democracy. Without log rolling, nothing will get passed because there are too many small special interest groups. So they say, you vote for me on this one, I'll vote for you on the next one. And that's how things get done. That's not real unity. The Jewish people is the opposite. We essentially are one. And since we are essentially one, we behave as one much of the time. Much of the time. You'll tell me that there are divisions within the Jewish people as well. That's true. And individual people can be ambivalent also. An individual person can have conflicting ideas in his mind, conflicting feelings in his heart, and lack total consistency. That can happen to an individual also. It doesn't mean he's not an individual. And that's the difference. Both end up with unity, but the unity is different. In the Jewish case, it's essential, and in the Egyptian case, it's superficial. That you can't get from the text. That's the comment of the oral tradition, which takes it from other elements in their history and other descriptions. But you can get unity from both, and you definitely should see it as unity in both cases. Are we together? Take a look at page 403. There are certain negotiations that go on before the actual revelation at Sinai. God tells the people, these are the conditions that's going to have to take place. And they have communication back and forth. Verse 7, God sent Moses with a message. Moses came and summoned the elders of the people and put before them all the words that Hashem had commanded him. The entire people responded together and said, everything that Hashem has spoken, we shall do. Some of you know Nasa v'Nishma, that's at the end of Mishpatim. There are 3 times that the responses are brought. Moses brought back the words of the people to Hashem. Hashem said to Moses, behold, I come to you in the thickness of the cloud, so that the people will hear as I speak to you, and they will believe in you forever. This is one of the many places where it says that everybody heard God speaking to Moses. I have met many students who are under the impression that the people heard nothing from God. Moses went up to a mountain and he came down and told them what he heard. That's dead wrong. There are at least 5 verses which say explicitly, this is one of them. Well, what I emphasize here is something that Maimonides talks about in the laws of fundamentals of the Torah. Look what he says. God says, I come to you in the thickness of the cloud, so the people will hear as I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever. Meaning, they've got to hear it. The only reason they're going to believe in you forever is because they're going to hear it themselves. That's why and how it's going to happen. If they don't hear it themselves, they're not going to believe you forever. Maimonides in chapter 8 of the Fundamentals of the Torah, in the Mishnah Torah, asks, did people believe that Moses was a prophet because he did miracles? And he says, no. Miracles do not ensure that the person is a prophet. They ensure that he's special, maybe even beloved by God. That says nothing about whether God spoke to him. Yes or no? The only proof that God ever spoke to anybody is if we hear it. If we hear it, then we have a proof, a direct experiential proof. And therefore, the only prophet whose claim to prophecy is known absolutely is Moses. You'll ask, Maimonides goes on to say, you'll ask, what about Isaiah? What about Jeremiah? What about Ezekiel? What about Amos? What about Yoshua? Why did we accept them as prophets? Says Maimonides, because Moses told us to. Not because we had our own verification that they were prophets. Moses gave us conditions. He said, if a person meets conditions A, B, C, D, then treat him as a prophet. Treat him as a prophet. You don't know that he's a prophet, but treat him as a prophet. And Maimonides makes the following explicit comparison. You're a judge. It's a criminal case, and there are witnesses. The witnesses give their testimony. There are rules for testing testimony. Cross-examine them, and you subject them to the cross-examination, and they pass all the tests. And now you're going to punish the defendant. Do you know that he's guilty? Says Maimonides, no, you do not. You don't know that he's guilty. All you know is that testimony was presented in court, and this testimony passes the legal tests, and the law says, when there's testimony that passes these tests, then punish the defendant. All you know is that you're doing the right thing by punishing him, because the legal procedures have been fulfilled. In exactly the same way, says Maimonides, our attitude towards Isaiah is, Moses told us to accept him as a prophet. And since Moses told to do that, and we know Moses' prophecy directly through our own experience, we have no doubts that what we are doing is correct. What we're doing is correct because these people have passed Moses' tests. But that's all. No more than that. And you could say the same thing for Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. It's written in the book that Moses dictated, the book that Moses wrote, letter for letter, that they were prophets. All of it comes from Moses. That's one of the reasons why no laws can come from any other prophet, because the prophecy of any other prophet is secondary. Okay, we're together so far? Now suppose somebody says, I'm just making this up, somebody says, listen guys, God speaks to me. God speaks to me. And if you doubt me, join me in the park Sunday afternoon. Fine. A few thousand people come to the park Sunday afternoon. So listen, see the lake here? Watch, guys. Watch this. And he takes a stroll on the surface of the lake. I'm just making this up, I mean, just sort of picking it out of the air. And he walks out of the lake and says, come take a look. See if there are any wooden props under me. Nothing there, it's all water. And he walks on the lake. So now people say, boy, that's impressive. What do you have to tell us? Oh, sir prophet, what do you have to tell us that God speaks to you? And he says, my first message to you is this. Not everything Moses told you is trustworthy. Not all of it's up to date. Some of it is misleading and incorrect. How do you think people are going to respond to an experience like that? What is their response going to be? Okay, but I mean, before you get to killing him...
I want to hear more of what he has to say.
He starts reciting the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Maybe I think that if with a miracle it's a credential, what he says is going to be accurate.
I don't see a lot of miracles.
What did we just say?
I said I don't see a lot of miracles regularly. I think he would definitely be an interesting person to listen to.
What did we just say? We said that miracles do not establish that a person is a prophet. The only thing that establishes for us that a person is a prophet is if he fulfills Moses' criteria. This guy says he took a stroll on the lake. That's one of the criteria. It is one of the criteria. One of the criteria. Okay. So now we're willing to listen to him. And he says, you can't trust everything Moses told you.
That's going against one.
I mean, he's just destroyed his own credibility. He's just destroyed his own credibility. So, it's like someone coming to an international border, say, let's see your passport. Presents the passport and say, where'd you get the passport? Oh, the ISIS were selling it down the street. Are they going to let him in? I mean, the passport is his ticket to get in, and he's admitting his passport is fraud. Here, the ticket to get in, to be accepted as a prophet, is that Moses told me to do it. And he's telling me I can't trust Moses? So he's just destroyed his own credibility.
Where do his powers come from? Where does the miracle come from?
It can come from God to test, as it says in Deuteronomy, to test whether I'm going to use the criteria that he gave or be bowled over by the fact that a person can do miracles. Or it can be, according to some strands of our tradition, that he has powers that go beyond the normal powers that people have. But the criteria for prophecy is only that you pass Moses' tests. If you tell me that I can't trust Moses, you have destroyed any reason that I would have for believing you. The Talmud has an example of this. Two salesmen come to a strange city. No, they don't know them. Salesman A says about salesman B, he's trustworthy. Salesman B says that A is a liar. Do I trust B? I don't think so, because B said he can't trust A, and A is the one who's giving the credentials of B. So then B has just destroyed his own credibility. Right? There are, say, cases like that where a person says something which then destroys his own credibility. And this is one of the reasons why Christianity did so poorly among Jews. Because for a Jew, the message is absurd. I'm only going to listen to you because Moses says so. You tell me that I can't trust Moses? So then, forget it. You're not in the running. As a matter of fact, I heard from Usher Waite. Usher Waite was a Protestant minister, and he was in Germany doing his doctorate. He's a Methodist minister. And then he met some Ger Hasidim, and that was that. And he now is a Rav. He lives here in Yerushalayim. And he gave tours of Yad Vashem until they kicked him out because he didn't follow their party line. The latest move there is that you can only take a tour guide from Yad Vashem. You're not allowed to come in with another tour guide because they want you to hear the party line and only the party line. That's free speech in the land of Israel. And he happens to be now a psychotherapist. But when I spoke to him about this, he said early Christianity had two centers, one here in Israel and one in what we would today call Syria. The one in Syria was preaching to Romans, and the one here was preaching to Jews. And the one preaching to the Romans was not doing well because you can't get a Roman to do circumcision, and you can't get a Roman to keep kosher. And it was just too much. And the one in Israel was doing terrible because the Jews weren't listening. So the ones in Syria said, we can't keep this up. You're holding us back. You're insisting that we preach all these commandments? Forget it. And after about 100 years, it broke. And then he said, no, you don't have to do circumcision. You don't have to keep, you can eat pigs. It's okay. God will love you anyway. Right? But they were doing poorly here because, in part because the message is inherently a paradoxical message. So this is where it stands with respect to prophets. Every prophet gets his credentials from Moses. He stands on Moses' credentials. Now, there's a statement in the Talmud. This is in Bava Basra, I think, Daf Ches, if I remember correctly, which says, Chacham adif binovi. The sage is superior to the prophet. Sage is superior to the prophet. The picture that comes up on the screen is, I got a sage here and a prophet here, and they somehow disagree about something, and the sage wins. On the surface, if the prophet is speaking in God's name, it's hard to understand that, why that would work that way. The Talmud searches for a proof of this principle. And as it's usual for its argumentation, it provides various proofs, and they all get knocked down until the final one. The final one says, once two sages were discussing an issue and debating it back and forth, finally one sage said, I think it should be like this, and the other sage said, you've jogged my memory. The way you put it now is a tradition going back to Moses. And the Talmud says, now we have a proof that sages are superior to prophets. Well, the conclusion is not exactly obvious what that has to do with it and how it's supposed to work. So Rabbi Gershom one of the early commentaries on that passage in the Talmud, together with some other items that I'm using to explain what he says. The argument works like this. Sages and prophets. Let's see. Suppose I have a sage. What is he a sage of? What makes him a sage? What body of material has he mastered? Quantum mechanics? Differential equations? Chinese history? Culinary arts? I mean, what makes him a sage? He's a master of Moses' revelation. He knows Moses' revelation. Okay, now let's imagine you have a conflict between a sage and Jeremiah. Jeremiah says, God told me Q. The sage says, excuse me, but in Moses' revelation, it says, not Q. Who's going to win? Well, Moses is going to win. No prophet can stand up to Moses. Every prophet gets his authority just from Moses. Here, the sage is representing Moses. He's a mouthpiece for Moses. It's not his authority. It's just he happens to know what Moses said. So, of course, if it's Jeremiah versus the sage quoting Moses, Jeremiah is going to lose. That wasn't what the Talmud was talking about. That doesn't need a proof. That's obvious. But what happens when the sage interprets Moses? This is what Moses said. Moses said ABC, and I deduce Q from ABC. And now I, the sage, say that Q represents Moses. And this prophet says, God told me not Q. Now it's not obvious. Now it's not obvious what to do, because this isn't pure Moses. This is Moses as interpreted by Hillel. Chain is as only strong as its weakest link. In this case, the weak link is Hillel. Who says that Hillel should win over a prophet? That's what the Talmud is discussing. And that's what the Talmud is bringing a proof to. Now let's go back. What did the Talmud say? Two sages were discussing an issue. Finally, one formulated a particular way. I think it should be XYZ. The other says, XYZ. I now remember. XYZ is a tradition that goes back to Moses. What happened here? The two of them are discussing other sources. They don't have XYZ in front of them. Neither of them remembers XYZ. They're discussing other sources, Mosaic sources, and they're analyzing them and interpreting them and fighting back and forth and revising, changing their minds until they finally arrive through their own argumentation, their own cogitation, they arrive at what Moses said. What this teaches you is that the mind of the sage is the right instrument for getting what Moses meant in what he told us. In the case of the Talmud, you have verification of it, because in analyzing everything else, they arrived at what he in fact did say. Now, of course, you can't logically prove something from one incident. The Gemara is telling you that we have an illustration here of a principle, that the mind of the sage is the right tool for understanding the Mosaic relation, to get at what that means and how it should be applied. Now, I'm choosing my words carefully. I try to do that all the time. And if something's wrong with my words, then I'll take it back. But if you paraphrase it and use other words, then it's usually not what I meant. When I say it's the right tool, you can use the right tool and get the wrong answer. Using the right tool means you're usually going to get the right answer. Using the right tool means you have a claim that your answer is right until somebody else can show you that it's a mistake. I'm not talking about infallibility here. No human being is infallible in anything that he does. But in this case, it's the right tool. So now, back to the conflict. The prophet comes in and says Q. And the sage says, Moses taught us ABC, and from ABC I deduce not Q, so you're wrong. That's where the Talmud says that the prophet is superior. The prophet is superior because he knows what Moses' prophecy means. And this, from our point of view, isn't an accident. It isn't as if we found this material buried under a rock someplace, written by some Afghanistan sage of 2,000 years ago, and now we're playing games with it. The same God who created us and created the Torah established that the way the sages interpret the Torah is the way in which the Torah has to be understood. So he made the Torah hand in glove for the mind of the sage, which he himself creates as well. So it's not as if we have to put together accidental correlations here. But that is what the principle is, that the mind of the sage is the right tool for interpreting what the Mosaic prophecy means. And therefore, when it's a conflict between a prophet or someone who claims to be a prophet and a rabbinic interpretation of Moses' prophecy, the rabbinic interpretation wins because it has the authority of Moses. Are we together so far? This principle answers a number of questions. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman has an essay on this. And, I don't know what people did beforehand. Once you have his essay at hand, he wrote in the 20th century. How people saw these things beforehand, I don't know, but we do have his essay. There are cases where the rabbis exert authority, and they exert that authority without any explicit verse which shows that they have that authority. Even you don't have explicitly anyway, codified anywhere in the record of the oral tradition, that doesn't mean it didn't exist, but don't have it codified anywhere, the oral tradition, where these principles come from, and they all come ultimately from this understanding that the sages who understand the Mosaic prophecy are the ones who can tell us what it means. For example, the normal understanding of the way the Torah works is a child who's not yet, a girl is not yet 12 or a boy is not yet 13, is a child, it's not an adult. And an adult can't have responsibilities. We, as adults, can have responsibility to train them, educate them, but they don't have any responsibilities. They're children. Indeed, when you talk about, let's say, rabbinic rules, the Talmud asks in several places, why are rabbinic rules binding upon us? And the normal answer, given several times, is the rabbinic rules are certified by rules that God dictated. There's a verse that says, don't turn aside from what they teach you, right or left. Don't turn aside from what they teach you. So, when they teach you something. Another one says, Al pi Torah she'erucha, everything you do has to be according to the Torah that they teach you. So there's a positive and a negative, what they teach you. So they say, light candles Friday afternoon, or when they say light Hanukkah lect, or when they say, don't eat chicken cheeseburgers, okay, so they told me and the Torah taught. But now, of course, that only applies to adults. Because the two verses on which all the rabbinic legislation hinges are verses that are addressed to adults. But there are positions that children have responsibilities also. They have responsibilities, and indeed the rabbis gave them responsibilities, and indeed, therefore, sometimes a child can do a mitzvah for an adult, and an adult can satisfy his obligation by listening to a child perform the mitzvah. A child can do it for him. If he didn't have any mitzvah and had no responsibilities, he couldn't do that. Rabbi Chanan Wasser says that's because when the rabbis said the child should do X, Y, Z, what they're saying is God wants him to do X, Y, Z. God wants him to do that. And if God wants him to do it, then he ought to do it. And they have the ability to do that. Another example. What would happen, would you imagine, if the Torah says do X and the rabbis say don't do X? So the natural response is, the rabbis can't fight with God. Of course they have to do it. But it's not correct. When Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar. Why not? The rule of blowing the shofar applies to Shabbos just as well as it does to a weekday. Not like the Yerushalmi who says it's off. The Bavli says it's just as responsible. Sukkot comes out on the first day of Sukkot comes out on Shabbos. Don't take the lulav and esrog. Why not? There's no prohibition. Nothing wrong with it. Shaking a branch. What's wrong with that? The rabbi said not to do it. You don't do it. So Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, in the same essay, has explanation of this, but with a limitation. Explanation is this. In any case where I have two positive commandments, this one says do A, this one says do B, and I say, man, where I'm sitting, I can't do both. I'm just not able to do both. To do A in Tel Aviv, you have to do B in Tzfas. I can't be in two places at the same time. It's my situation. I have to do both of them, and I'm stuck. Or A says, go to town, and the other one says, stay home. I can't go to town and stay home. I cannot do both of them. There's a rule, a meta rule. The rule is, if you have two positive commandments applying to you, one says to do something, the other says to refrain, be passive. Be passive and refrain. So now, apply that to, let's say, Rosh Hashanah coming out on Shabbos. Rosh Hashanah coming out on Shabbos. The Torah says, blow the shofar. Okay, I hear that. The Torah is telling me to actively blow the shofar. The rabbis say, don't blow the shofar, but they have a biblical commandment backing them up. Al pi Torah she'yerucha. Should do according to what they teach you. So now I have a conflict between two biblical commandments, one active and one passive. The meta rule is, sit with your hands folded and don't do anything. So the rabbis win. Whenever the Torah tells you to do something active, and the rabbis say be passive, they're going to win because they're appealing to this meta rule, which gives them that leverage. Are we together so far? Great. Most Rishonim say that's the limit beyond which the rabbis can't go. They can't go any further than that. They can only tell you not to do, because then they win through the meta rule. Tosfos, at least 5 places in Shas, says there's no such limit. There's no such limit. The rabbis can tell you to actively violate what the Torah says. You have to listen to it. And he uses the following phrase, Im yesh tam v'panim ladavar. If there's a reason, and I don't know how to translate panim in this context, if it makes sense, if it's appropriate, if it'll have good consequences, they can break any rule. They can break any rule. Permanently. If you've heard of Rosh Hashanah, I'm not talking about Rosh Hashanah, I'm talking about that permanently. Tosfos gives no explanation where it comes from. Tosfos simply says, it's like it's obvious to them. When the rabbis see that it's appropriate to do it, they can do it. How do they do that? They do that because, as Rabbi Hanan says, theoretically there isn't a limit. If there is a limit in some cases because they took the limit upon themselves, not because they're ultimately limited, knowing Moses' prophecy means knowing what Moses' prophecy wants, and they then become the voice of Moses' prophecy. Now, this has gigantic consequences. Americans find this very difficult to deal with because we are brought up on a slogan. We live by a rule of laws and not a rule of men. And this is supposed to disqualify all the dictatorships in the world where dictators can simply do as they please. No, but we have laws, and laws apply to everybody equally, and everybody has to obey them, and they're objective. Of course, they aren't objective, and they are reinterpreted all the time. And if you'll ever have a spare weekend with nothing important to do, and I mean that seriously, take out some Supreme Court decisions and read them. Half of a Supreme Court decision is politics. How will people take it, and what will happen to the economy, and people's prejudices, and so forth and so on, and things have changed, and it's not what we call scholarship. It's politics. And the idea that you live in the rule of a rule of laws and not men is at best a half-truth. And the same is true in our case. We never said it. We have a rule of laws and not a rule of men. We have laws, but the men who administer the laws, not only interpret them, but administer them, have enormous authority. And this means, this is the last remark, this means we have no Sanhedrin, we have no king, we have no prophets. Those are the 3 sources of authority in the Jewish political system. They have authority that's given to them by the Torah to make certain decisions, practical and theoretical, legal, and we don't have any of them. Are we simply leaderless and lost? No, we are not. Because the sages can fill those roles to a certain extent, with certain limitations, but they can fill those roles. And in a certain way, they have a tremendous amount of flexibility because they can tell us, given their understanding of what Moses' prophecy means, what God wants from us. The source of all of this is this verse in Exodus 19, that his prophecy, Moses' prophecy, is the top, and the sages who know it therefore can trump prophets, and therefore we have their leadership and guidance.